Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Certainty Talks. On this show, we talk about the system we use to get clarity on our goals, certainty on how we reach them, and wealthy on our terms by rigging the game in our favor. As we share it here, and we share it here because we want to help you reach your goals on your terms. You've been told to scale, buy these products from each way, often from good-meaning people. So it's not your fault when you look around and wonder, why am I not where I want to be in business? And as our mentor and business partner, Dan Nicholson, says, the biggest risk is that we don't get what we want out of life. Got my good friend and business partner in the Whale Club here, Mr. Paul Sparks himself, not only a successful real estate investor, but also a certified certainty advisor. And guys, if you get value out of the show, please hit that subscribe button right now. That way we can help more people become wealthy on their terms. Title for today's show, How to Make Your Case. Should Steve build a realtor team again? Before we get into it, 6-word update. What you got, Paul?
6-word update today. Only one thing in the middle. And this is a reference to something that we just went through last week with the Whale Club, talking about the barbell framework. There's a bunch of episodes that Steve and I have done over the last year on the barbell framework. And it's this idea that we really want to have things on one side of the bar or the other. You know, we don't want to be loading too much weight in the middle of the bar. And I think, just not to fully elaborate on that, but I found that I had a lot of things that I was trying to work on that were in the middle of the bar. And now I'm trying to focus on only one thing in the middle. So that's my 6-word update today.
Perfect. So I got to do a presentation for CG last week. Man, it just felt like so much longer ago. And I had to reread Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely, one of my favorite human psychology books. And there was a quote in there by Socrates that I think really sums up a lot of what we're trying to do inside the Whale Club and Certainty Talks. And his quote was, "The unexamined life isn't worth living." Right? Like, is that a punch in the gut? You know, so many of us just kind of drift. We go with the flow. We follow. We do what we're told by everyone else. Here's the right way to do this. Here's the right way. You got to get good grades, go get a good job, this and that. Go to college. Or, hey, if you're going to build a business, make sure you do this. Get it, hire an integrator, scale, and all these things, right? And we're so constantly telling people how to run their business, how to live their lives, and we just kind of follow along, right? Because we want to be part of the tribe. But when I reread that quote, the unexamined life isn't worth living. It just brought me back to all these conversations you and I have had in Certainty Talks, Whale Club, and our conversations on Sundays.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
and why do we not want to examine our life? Like, why, when we say the unexamined life is not worth living, why do you think we fall victim to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason why we go through this is because we've got a lot of skeletons in our closets that we don't really want to examine. Darren Hardy is someone that I've looked up to as a mentor for the longest time. And one of the things he talks about is the reason why we're always on our phones, checking our social media, why we have to listen to music or Audible or whatever while we're driving, and we can't just drive in silence. It's because when we're silent or we're bored, it forces us to reflect. And when we reflect, we might not like what we hear, right? When we have to actually examine what's going on, it can be kind of scary. I mean, that's the reason why meditation is so powerful, right? But if you're always bombarded with sounds and distractions, kind of drift, and drifting is more comfortable.
Well, and to piggyback on that, it's more comfortable for sure. And we have a kind of like a framework or a quote that we always talk about in the Whale Club. And it was from a woman who was actually a child psychologist. Her name was Virginia Satir. And she says, most prefer the certainty of misery to the misery of uncertainty. Mm-hmm. And wow, that hit me like a ton of bricks. What I think about, the best example I think about with that is, it's that high school girlfriend that we all dated. Mm-hmm. That you knew that you probably should break this up. Like, it's not going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But you stay in the relationship because it's just, even though it's not great, you know what to expect.
Mm-hmm. Comfortable.
And we ask ourselves, like, well, it's so uncertain what's going to happen if we break it off, and I'm going to be alone, and maybe I won't find someone better, all these things that we tell ourselves. And we do the same thing in business, right?
We do. So yeah. I hope that resonates for everyone else that's listening. So going back to the title of the show, right? How to make a case to Steve build his realtor team again. So, we did Pardon the Disruption a couple of weeks ago, and there was a conversation about agent outreach, which is a trending topic, I want to say, for the last year and a half. And that's a show we do with, Eric Brewer, Leon Barnes, CJ, RJ, Jimmy Vreeland. And Eric mentioned, well, he also works with realtors because we already have the data because we pulled a list. We've already skip traced the list. So we have actually what realtors want. Motivated sellers, right? He's like, why don't we collaborate with them? To which I thought, why don't we collaborate with them? Like, this is a brilliant idea. But before I make any kind of commitments, I want to talk to Paul, right? Which is what we're doing here today. So, just to preface this, I have talked to, Matthew Potter, the host of PTD, got his input, my title rep, my best friend, right? And Eric. I actually called Eric directly, right? And to get everyone's perspective. But I didn't want to make any commitments or obligations before we actually make our case. And so we got Mr. Paul Sparks, right? This is the guy who helps other people make their case. So before we even make any kind of commitments, any decisions, plant our flag on the ground or name our puppy, I guess. Before we name our puppy, let's go through this exercise. Let's make our case.
Yeah. Well, and for those that are listening, Steve and I, this is live ammo here. Like, we're going to do this process, and we're probably going to, because Steve and I have spent a lot of time coordinating language, we have terms and things that we're not going to slow down to explain today. We're just going to go through the process of, this is how we solve problems. And again, some of this is going to sound like, I don't know what name the puppy means, or I don't know what the parenting frame is, or these different things, but we're going to show you how we use this with an actual problem. So this is going to be fun.
Yeah.
So should Steve build a realtor team? And for those, we're talking about the case framework. So let's define what that means. CASE is an acronym. That stands for what, Steve?
Compile, analyze, strategize, execute.
Yes. And so we always want to kind of go in that order, because Steve and I are people that are very susceptible to, I could do this thing and I could make more money doing it.
Yep.
So before we take off, we use this framework to kind of, let's start with the collect phase. So first question, like we always ask, is this even worth doing? Is this worth doing? And how does this align with our solvable problem? So, as youth, again, I know your solvable problem, but talk to me a little bit, just like articulate that for those that are listening, what it is you're actually trying to get closer to.
I mean, the solvable problem, when we broke it down, really it's just like $20K a month. Like, we really don't need a whole bunch, right? Like, that's what's crazy. We don't need that much. So in the grand scheme of things, 90% of listeners are probably in that $20K a month, and we're all probably just as close, right, to getting there. But taking a step further, the why, right? It's having a wife that feels cherished, having kids that are well-adjusted and fulfilled, being able to create millionaires within our organization, and be able. This is the big hairy one, right? This is to be around for my great grandkids. I can mentor them to, right? Not my grandkids, because that's like a given, right? As long as we don't do anything stupid, we should be there. But to be able to stick around and make an impact, lasting legacy, where we can even help our great grandkids.
Yeah, that's great. And you spend a lot of time working through being able to articulate that and being able to clearly explain what you're trying to accomplish
Mhm.
is critical, because I think we can all agree, and you say this in the intro, the biggest risk that we all face is not getting what we want out of life.
Right.
And so we want to make sure all of our decisions are getting us closer to what we're trying to accomplish without chasing more and more and more. Because again, all of us would agree that all the money in the world would be for nothing if we didn't have this, these other things, the cherished wife, well-adjusted and fulfilled kids, being able to make an impact on your organization, being, your health and your happiness.
Yeah.
So we've got to evaluate these decisions in reference to those other things. So the question really is here, should you build this realtor team? So you tell me, what are the things that we need to consider in terms of impact to the other? Because of course you could make more money. Could you make more money doing this? I guess, is that a yes or a no?
I mean, that's an easy yes.
Okay. So we can make more money doing this, but how does this impact other things? Or does it?
So it impacts things in two ways, right? Let's just qualify this. If this goes as planned, right? Because nothing goes exactly as planned. If this goes as planned, I'm really fortunate to have an ecosystem where this actually feeds multiple avenues, right? I'm at Real, right? Real Brokerage, which is an MLM. So we are financially incentivized to recruit, right? So it brings in more money there. We own a title company. If we bring in more realtors and we give them the data and we say you need to use our title company, it feeds the title company. We're giving the realtors data from our wholesale company, right? So if you're using the data from our wholesale company, guess what? Our team eats first. If the seller says, I want to meet with a realtor, and after they meet with the realtor, it's like, well, I still want a cash offer. You're only bringing in one cash offer, and it's ours, right? And then anything they list, because I'm a licensed realtor, they're going to pay me at least 50% referral fee, right? So the answer to the money part or the upside part, the answer is yes, and I think it has a good amount of upside. The fear, right? How does this impact us? Is, what was it? Every decision has an infinite number of trade-offs. Mm-hmm. What is it going to cost us, right? Cost us as far as focus, attention. Where will this hurt us? Parenting frame. Where will this hurt us that we're not aware of yet? That's where that you're talking about. Will this impact other businesses? It'll absolutely impact other businesses. How will it hurt us? Are the areas I'm not quite clear on.
Well, let's break that apart then, and we'll use the barbell to sort of articulate that. What do you have right now on the reliable side of your barbell? And how close really, because ideally we want to get this 20,000 a month from the reliable side. Right. So I guess my question is well, how close are we to that?
On the active side, it's not reliable whatsoever. All right. We have peaks and valleys. So it is not reliable. I would say if you look at all the pieces, the most reliable are the two pieces. The most reliable are actually there's three pieces. The title company is fairly consistent. That's 10 to 20K a month in, month out, right? The education business, right? As far as profits, that's anywhere from 20 to 40K a month, right, in profits. And then Real, it's reliable, but it's not great. It's like 3,000 a month, right? Yeah. So that's the business side. But then you look at the personal side, right? Because, over the years we've acquired some properties. So I think we're at 5K a month in passive cash flow, like after property managers paid and everything. Actually, I think I take that back. It's closer to 6. I always forget that we have fractional ownership in an apartment complex. So about 6K a month in passive.
So title company 10 to 20K, education 20 to 40K, personal 6K.
Yeah.
So fair enough, or fair to say, on the low end, you're at what, 36,000 a month. So you've exceeded your.
Well, that's those companies. But on the grand scheme of things, if you look at, the active side, I would say if you add it all together, because we have ebbs and flows between all of them. We have the wholesale company on any given month, right? It's either -10 or 100, like any given month. So that's unreliable. And then we do have a component for a holding company for all the companies, and we have pretty significant payroll there, right? So running the wholesale, not the wholesale, the media side, that takes a pretty healthy chunk, and then the space and everything else. So that's what I'm saying. Like, I would not, if you take the hold of the whole thing, it is not reliable by our traditional means of, if I go take a vacation for 3 months, it's just going to be like still flowing. I would not consider this to be reliable.
Sure. But fair to say that the title company
is reliable.
The personal investments that you have, those are fairly on autopilot at this point. Like, it's highly predictable and reliable.
Yes.
We also have the education, which is also fairly predictable and reliable from what you're saying.
The floor is predictable and reliable.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And because you have designed that business as like a continuity business, meaning people pay you every month, it's highly predictable.
Yes.
Similar to a rental property, it's highly predictable.
Yes.
Great. And I think I actually just want to mention something. Last week, you and I were both at Collective Genius, and I heard Jack Bosch, I know you are in business with, and some other ventures and things.
Yeah.
He described the solvable problem in the barbell in a slightly different analogy. Because he's a German guy, he described it as like, the castle with the moat, and it's like the reliable stuff is the stuff that goes inside the castle. You want to build these walls up as high as you possibly can. You want to dig this moat around so absolutely nothing can touch it. It goes into the vault. It goes into the castle. Like, it's in there. It's in the bank. We don't touch it. It's the reliable stuff.
Right. Exactly.
So you've got, from what you're telling me here, what you need on the reliable side.
Yes.
Okay. What is on the what's on the other side? The asymmetric bets. And as you and I know, asymmetric means big upside with low downside. Often that downside could be effort and energy that you're having to put in. Like, you don't have to really do a whole lot.
Right.
And it's not really predictable, but if it hits, the upside's big because, again, you didn't have to put anything out. If your effort is zero and your risk is zero, that's an asymmetric bet because anything that you get is upside at that point. What do you have there?
I would go back to the education company, a different part of it, a different segment of it. We got our sales community within it, right? So even within the education company, we have our client base. That's the reliable, right? Everyone in CG, that's the reliable side. Our sales community has tremendous upside with very little downside. But this is one of the things that we're feeding, right? I would say, what else is on the upside? I can't think of anything else specifically on the upside except for because I put education kind of on both, just different components. What part of it's reliable, part of it has upside. But I would say the wholesale is definitely in the middle of the barbell, right? It's not reliable. It's got good upside, but it also has downsides as well.
Well, then, the downside is not always a financial ramification. We have to realize that as small business owners, resources are scarce.
Yeah.
So when you said it already, that everything has an infinite number of trade-offs, which means when you choose to work on something, there's other things that your resources are now not able to be applied to. And the middle of the bar is where most of us find the things that we're doing, right? Like, we have rental properties, we have some stuff in the castle, in the vault, on the reliable side of the barbell. These are all ways of saying the same thing. So let's talk about what's in the middle of the bar and what makes something middle of the bar.
Yeah.
What does that look like? What first of all, what does middle of the bar mean?
Well, middle of the bar is that it's not reliable and predictable,
Yep.
and it doesn't have asymmetric risk to the upside, right? Low risk, high reward. Not necessarily low risk, but significantly lower risk in proportion to the reward, right?
Yeah.
So I would say the wholesale company sits there because it doesn't have a really high floor, right? The floor goes past zero on that side, because between overhead and marketing, if we have a goose egg for the month, that's a negative. That's not like we only made 10K this month.
Yeah. So wholesaling, I would also argue that Whale Club is in the middle of the bar right now because we're building more reliability into that business.
Right.
You know, you and I are actively working on that community. So these are, I just think of it as like, what are we actively doing throughout the day? So you're working on the wholesale, business.
Well, I would say we're talking about like an activity inventory, right? So we went through this morning, right? So an hour on Tuesday, 3 hours on Wednesdays, 2 hours on Thursdays, right? So that's 6 hours every week, week in, week out, fulfilling the coaching that we've sold, right? 6 hours set aside for coaching. 3 hours a week, closer to 4, sorry, more like 4 hours a week, podcast, right? It's Certainty Talks, Real Estate Disruptors, and part of the disruption, right? So probably more than 4 hours doing research and so on. So right there.
I would also argue that podcasting is an upside play.
Yeah.
Because the downside is very low. You spend an hour, and the upside is tremendous because you have all these outlets to capture things, right? So someone wants to join your sales leadership. They want to join Whale Club. They want to invest with you. They want to sell you a house, whatever. A lot of that comes from a very low risk activity, which is podcasting.
Yeah. And then we have meetings, right? I wouldn't really count those towards anything, but I mean, there's 4+ hours a week in meetings. So beyond that, right, what are we focused on? So we're going to talk about middle of the barbell. Because I'm not actually spending a lot of time in the wholesale company, right? That's all ran by someone else. So what am I actually actively spending time doing, right? Sales leadership, Whale Club, and sales training. That's it. Those are the 3 things that we're saying. Like we're talking about, amount of activity and effort. Those are 3 that we're applying effort into.
Right. And, you're the CEO, right? Like your job is not necessarily to do all of the work, but to recognize how to direct resources.
Allocating resources. That's predominantly what I'm doing. Allocating resources and then putting out fires, right? People's feelings get hurt throughout all operations, right? So putting out fires, and then figure out where some things are broken. We recently switched everything over from active campaign and Kartra into Go High Level, right? And as I'm doing this why did we do this transition? The sales guys on our education side were set up for failure because there was no accountability piece inside of active campaign. So we had to switch CRMs. Well, as we're switching CRMs, you can just see all the years of just waste, right? Like, I recently reread Scaling Up, and there's something Vern Harnish says in there that's really painful. I think it was that one. I think it was Vern Harnish, which is that either you're growing and scaling or you're funding waste. Oh, that sucks.
Right.
So
growing and scaling, I think also. So yeah, growing and scaling, growth can mean raising the floor.
Mm-hmm.
We confuse those 2 things. We talk about raising the ceiling versus raising the floor.
Right.
And we hear these words of growth and scale, and we think that means bigger, more deals, whatever. Yeah. But sometimes that can just mean getting rid of the negative months, right? Raising the floor so that we're consistently bringing in positive profitability. So our downside is significantly limited.
Right.
So out of these 3 things, wholesale, Whale Club, sales leadership, you're applying energy and effort and resources to these things, your own personal energy, effort, and resources.
Right.
So if we add this and ideally, my 6-word update for the day was only one thing in the middle. You and I just have a tendency. We're always going to have that tendency, I think, to just want to take on more. We see this opportunity, we want it, and so we go for it. So we know that we have to be cognizant of too many things in the middle of the bar.
Sure.
So do you feel like now is the appropriate time to add something else into the middle of the bar?
Plainly, no. The answer is no. I'm going to qualify it, but
well, so what we need to do then is we can't put it in the middle of the bar, not right now.
Right.
It either needs to be an asymmetric bet, or we need to figure out what does that look like to make it reliable fairly quickly. Who is that person? It's the Ben Hardy thing. Who, not how.
Right.
It doesn't have to be you.
It's absolutely not going to be me. I mean, I already knew that. No matter what I do, it will never be me leading a venture. So, for me, most of my energy is going to be in either podcasting or the sales training. Right. Like those are the things that give me energy. Right. Like Whale Club, jumping on those calls, right? Watching people win. Like you sent me a testimonial yesterday by one of our members, right? Like he had an emotional reaction to the call yesterday. Like that's awesome, right? Like that is what fuels me. That's what gives me energy. So I would say between fulfilling coaching and podcasting, these are the things that give me energy. So that's where most of my resources or most of my time is going to be spent. So yeah, any new venture we do, it won't be me leading it unless it's something that's got so much upside and requires little involvement from other people. But I already know because I've built the brokerage. I've built a large realtor team. It will 100% not be me because I will want to burn it after a week. Right. Sure. So it will not be me spending effort on this.
So then how do we create, anytime we do something new, it can't be reliable. Now you've done this before. So we do have some data that actually you don't really like this business. So I think that needs to be considered because we talk about preference versus binary. Just because we can do something doesn't mean we always should do something.
Right.
So the question is, how do we keep this asymmetric to the upside?
Well, we already knew from day one that if we were going to do this, it'd be a matter of who, not how. Right. Anytime I was like, hey, I've got this idea. It's got to be who, not how. There's another crazy idea we can talk about some other time, right? But if it requires effort from me, more than an hour and a half of effort a week of effort from me, it's going to be a no. Like we already have enough things going on. So then it's a matter of like, can we find the right candidate? And so the cool thing is that we have a director of recruiting within our organization now who's always on the lookout for new salespeople. And as we have on the lookout for new salespeople, we have a candidate who doesn't work for our dispo side. But she's had a lot of experience recruiting realtors, managing realtors, and she's been in the wholesale game. Right? So I was like, and she's a persuader, right? Which is a decent enough profile on the predictive index to manage salespeople. So we're looking at this, and I don't know if she's the one, but if she is the one, she's going to be in charge of running it and we'll allocate some resources towards it. It'll definitely not be me. I already knew that going in.
Right. Well, and so we just want to make sure that if you're going to do this thing, that it's just not costing you resources, that additional resources, right?
Yeah.
If we can reallocate unused resources to something that can get us asymmetric bets to the upside. There's only so many times I can say that phrase.
But having screwed up so many times, actually someone pulled me aside. It's like, how do you continue to give like all these like rock star presentations at CG, which is like an incredible compliment, right? It's like, well, because I have really made a lot of like explosive mistakes in my career and we get a chance to learn from all of them, right? So what do I know now? A is always going to be 10 times harder, right? So I know this is going to take resources from our CFO, right? Because there's going to be one more set of books she's going to have to manage, right? There's going to be one more. We're going to have to spend some more time inside the Sky Slope and the internal database, right, for managing realtors. That's going to happen. This person's going to have to be in our leadership meeting, right? Because we're going to have to bring in another leader. And we already have a leadership team of myself, Larry, Jaden, Summer, and Elias. That's 5 people already in our leadership meeting. We're going to bring in a 6. Right now, our leadership meetings are supposed to be 90 minutes. Usually run about an hour 45. So there's going to be some more time. It's going to lengthen our leadership meetings. We're going to have, it doesn't cost us anything, but we're going to have another Google chat, right? These are little small things that we have to add over time. Another email, this and that, but it's just complexity within an organization grows by adding another piece. So those are things that I'm aware of already, not taking into account things I'm not aware of.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that the main question here is this going to impact, because you are the face of the brand, right? Like,
yeah.
You doing the podcasting, engaging in the communities, this is your top, most valuable revenue generating activity.
Right.
The number one question is like, how does this impact that? And how can we engineer it in a way so that it doesn't impact that?
Mm-hmm.
It also doesn't impact the people who are there to support you in doing that, right? Elias runs the media team. Is this going to impact his ability to, and I think I already know the answer.
It's definitely going to be at a bare minimum a drag. At a bare minimum, right? So
it's not zero.
It's not zero. Yeah. So like I already learned, right? It's because of how many different things we do, it confuses our audience, right? What does Steve do, right? Is he a sales trainer? Is he a podcaster? Does he teach certainty? Is he a dispo guy? Is he a list guy? Like what is he, right? So one thing I'm already aware of is that I have very little intention on promoting the Realtor team, right? So if I do this, I don't fully intend to spend a lot of time on social media promoting it.
Right.
Someone else can be responsible for the recruiting. Someone else can be responsible for the promotion of that company. But it won't be on me because our audience is already confused as to what we do. I can't add any more to it.
Well said. We got to keep the main thing the main thing. You know, this is just back to Gary Keller, right? The one thing.
The one thing.
What's the one thing? I mean, the one thing, like, I know you as a sales trainer. I think that's how most of the industry knows you. So I think every time, and this comes back to commissioner frame, we need to ask ourselves, how does this impact the number one most important thing, which for you is podcasting and talking about sales training. It's kind of two things. They sort of mold and meld together to create the Steve Trang brand, right? And that is the most, I think, the biggest risk with anything that you do is how does it impact the brand? How does it impact people's understanding of what you do and your value? Because that's how you generate revenue through all of your businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't know how to impact negatively. We should definitely spend more time on that. I forgot one of the other positives is as we're building our sales community, right, which is a generic sales training. It's not wholesaling specific or flipping specific. One of the biggest opportunities, even before Eric brought up this idea, was that I used to have a good amount of influence in the realtor community. I should be pushing our sales community upon the realtors, right? And so I think there's also that other component as well. Anyway, that was a distraction, but that was, we're talking about other ways it impacts. Realtors are super connected. If we can get more realtors inside our sales community, I think it will help us hit critical mass sooner, whereas a community that builds upon itself. But yeah, going back to like, how do we prevent this from hurting the brand?
Or sucking up resources from the people who are helping you build and promote the brand, right?
Yeah. So how does this, and just for everyone that's listening right now, is this collecting or analyzing?
I think we're still in the collect phase.
Okay. So yeah, because we talked about a suck on our financial, our CFO, right? We talked about how it's going to suck up in the leadership meetings. So we might have more meetings just because we have this other department. How is it going to affect media? I'm certain we're going to have a situation where they're going to require some attention. And we're going to have to, I would say probably in thinking this through, we would not allow any, I'm glad we're going through this exercise because we get to think through this. I wouldn't allow media resources to be applied towards this until revenue is coming in from this venture, right? So setting the rules, the commissioner frame.
Yep.
Until revenue is coming in from this new venture, we cannot allocate any media resources towards it.
That's a great rule. No resources until profitable. Yep. I'm making notes of all these commissioner frames that we're adding. Profitable.
By the way, compiling sucks.
That's how you create asymmetry, right? Like the way that it stays on the asymmetric side is by having a big upside with a low downside. What does it mean to reduce downside? It means that it doesn't impact the rest of the business. It's not taking resources from these businesses. It can stand alone. And until we've got a preponderance of data to support that this is a profitable thing to do, it's okay to take a micro step.
Yeah.
And we'll come back to that. Let's talk about the 4 frames real quick. And again, I'm not even going to slow down to explain this. We're just going to go through it. Go back and listen to our old podcast if you want to learn more about using the 4 lenses.
Yeah. Well, I have it right here also, just on my laptop, my desktop cover. So I'm looking at it over here.
So is it a revenue generator? Clearly.
Yeah.
Is it a time savings?
No, we are definitely not saving time with this. We're compressing time, but we're not saving time. And that's an if. The compressing time is an if.
So I think that there's certain things that we can do to make sure that this is a time savings. I think it comes down to there's also, and I don't know the person that you're considering for this role, but it's going to require the right person that can 100%. Be autonomous.
100% requires the right person. So we would not start this venture. Like, even if we wanted to do it, just like we have right now on the shelf, right? Starting a hedge fund, right? That's on the shelf right now until the right guy is ready. And we have the right guy. He's just not mentally ready, right? But once he's ready, he and Potter are going to be running the hedge fund, right? So, so yes, definitely this is an idea that we're seeing if we like the idea. But even if we love the idea, we are definitely not leaving the dock until we have the right captain.
Yeah. So we're going to do everything that we can at the beginning to make sure that the time is very minimal, right? If we do this, it has to be on our terms and no resources until profitable. It can't impact the one thing. And Steve can't spend more than an hour and a half a week on anything new that is an upside play. So we got those down. Cost savings. How does this save you cost?
Does reusing data count as a saving cost?
I start thinking more and more, yes. Because it's sort of like, trying to think of a good analogy here. I'm just an engineer, so I'm just going to say it how I think of it. Like if you've got a production system, you're manufacturing something, and the scrap that is created from that process can be repurposed and used for something additional. Yeah. That is a cost savings, right? It's a value add. It's in Lean Six Sigma world, that is a value add and certainly a cost savings. And so that's how I see it here is it's waste, it's scrap, right? Otherwise you were just going to toss this stuff aside. You weren't going to use it. So what you're saying here is how do we repurpose something that we were already going to be spending money on? Yeah. And if we threw it away, we're just throwing this out. Is there a way to repurpose this and use it somewhere else in process? And so I see it as a cost savings.
Yeah. I know for us, going back to engineering, right? When I worked at Intel, I worked in the memory department, right? So like the hard drives or the drive, right, was the storage inside your phone is memory, right? It's USB, not USB, it's flash memory. And for years, I worked at Intel for 3.5 years. A year and a half of that, I was working in the memory division, which is profitable one quarter ever, was like, why are we even in this? Why do we even exist? And they're like, well, you see, we spent $4 billion building the Silicon Foundry, and we need to get as much out of that $4 billion as possible. So even though we lose money, we at least get to reuse this foundry and then price drop and cut everyone else's profit margins, right? So Samsung can't sell the memory for as much and so on. So it wasn't even to make money. It was just to hurt everyone else. So they were able to reuse their foundry and hurt everyone else. It was a win for Intel.
It's a win.
It's a win, right? So yes. So in this instance, it's kind of like reusing the foundry. We're reusing our data. We already spent the money on the data. We've already skip traced it. We have the phone numbers. We know they're motivated in some capacity or another.
Right. And I think the key here too is that I don't want this to get mistaken for the reason why this makes sense in the cost savings part of the lens is because it doesn't cost you a whole lot to rework that scrap. We're gonna design this in a way that we're just taking it and giving it to somebody else and saying, here, make use of this.
Yeah. Work this list.
Work this list. Yeah. Is this a forcing function?
Is this a forcing function? Is this forcing me to do something else I wouldn't normally be doing? I could say, the only forcing function here I can think of at the moment is our dispo guy quit on a Friday. So this would help on dispositions. But I feel that's kind of a stretch. What is this forcing me to do?
And I think typically when forcing function is obvious, it's a forcing function, right? When we're sitting here saying like, how does this force me to do something I already was? It's like, well, it's probably not a forcing function.
Yeah.
Right. You didn't need to do this.
Yeah. I guess, and this is also a stretch, which is I always seem to do when we go through these lenses, is that we were intending on recruiting at some point for the downline at Real, right? But is that really necessary? Not necessary, but it was something we were intending on doing, was building our downline at Real. We just haven't dedicated any resources to it.
Yeah. So, I'm going to put this on the shelf as like probably not a forcing function.
Not really. That's something I had to do.
So it's a revenue generator. It's a cost savings, time savings. It's not going to be a time savings initially, but to your point, it is something that I think can help you get to these, other things faster if it does work, right? If this works, it could be a time savings because it allows you to make a bigger impact and get where you're going faster. Yeah. So we just need to be cognizant that we're not going to allocate any resources to it until we know that it's profitable. So let's talk through quickly some of the lenses, some of the frames. So we have the commissioner frame. Mm-hmm. It can't take up any more than a certain amount of time per week. You said 1.5 hours.
Yeah.
So we constantly need to be reevaluating as we're micro stepping through this. Who is this impacting? Because it's going to be really easy for us to make this decision and then justify over time. Hey, can I have, hey, can I meet with you about this? Hey, can I do this? Hey, can I do that? If it starts sucking up resources from the one thing, we have to shut it down immediately.
Yeah.
No, we are not going to allow this to impact that. And we're not going to allocate any resources until we're profitable. So I think your number one thing here is to continue to build out anything else that's there and clearly communicate that to this person who's coming in. Mm-hmm. Because if they don't know the rules of your engagement, hey, we see this as a big upside play, but it only stays an upside play if it doesn't suck up the resources from the other people. So it comes down to the right person in the right seat, I think.
Right. Well, it absolutely comes down to that for sure.
Okay. Let's play professional skeptic, Steve.
Yeah.
Why should we not do this? Why is this a terrible idea?
It's a terrible idea if it becomes a distraction from the one thing, right? Our number one activity. I say that's the first thing. I don't know if this comes back to like, I kind of live in these two worlds, right? Realtor and wholesaler. I started in the realtor side, and I kind of feel like I've become a little bit of a black sheep in the realtor community, you know, because I'm pretty heavy on the wholesaling side. And now we're kind of going back to like, okay, now we're a realtor and wholesaler, which some people might have a distaste for, but it doesn't matter to me. Why else is it a bad idea? Besides sucking up resources.
How could this impact your brand by confusing your clients?
Well, since we're not going to be dedicating resources or not pushing it out, you know, not in our emails, not in our social media, it shouldn't confuse the brand.
Right. So the reason why this would be a bad idea is if it impacted those things. How about like the other currencies?
So time, influence, money. I think money is a positive here. Energy, we already said, you know, an hour and a half a week. Relationships, I think, is actually a plus for relationships because it gives me an opportunity to rehash a lot of the old relationships that I've kind of abandoned since I left the realtor side. Why else should we not do this?
Yeah, that's the hard one, right? When we're seeing it as like such a great opportunity,
Well,
and it may be that there's not a ton of reasons.
Well, that's something that you and I have talked about, right? Like in the Whale Club, is that as entrepreneurs with shiny object syndrome, when it's like we can see it, we can taste it, you know, we can hold it. It's really hard for us to see the downside. It's this close. There are downsides. There's absolutely downsides, but it's hard. And I think that's one of the biggest weaknesses in my just the way I'm wired is seeing all the things can go wrong. I need people. It's actually the reason why the people around me are super realistic is because I need someone to keep me grounded. Otherwise, I'm always in the clouds. All right. So everyone around me is actually very, very realistic.
Yeah.
So.
Well, then maybe what you can do, because that's really good. You want to have these advisors around you. And this is the power of teaching them this language as well. So what I might recommend you do then is like go talk with your leadership team and get them to answer that question.
Yeah.
Why is this we're going to play professional skeptic here. And we're just going to see things through this lens. And before we do this, I want to get your feedback on why we think that what risk that could this pose to the brand? Why is this a bad idea? I would go collect that information from them. Just get them to articulate it because they're going to see things that you don't see. And this is why I have guys like Dr. Jeff in my corner, because I see money and I'm like, ooh, I could make more money if I did this thing. But of course, you know, asking your wife, asking other people from those days, like, why is this a bad idea? And be open to taking and collecting that information before we make any other decisions.
Yeah.
But let's assume that you did that for the sake of this conversation.
I mean, I've surveyed a good amount of people, and only person that's like said you're an idiot is my best friend, who's also my accountability partner, right? And he has a decent amount of clout, right? We've known each other since 7th grade. We've been like best friends since like 7th grade. And also, I mean, he recently exited his company for 80 mil, so he knows what he's talking about, right? So I don't take his opinion lightly.
Well, and not everybody's going to be right. I mean, you can, but I think that you should hear them all out, right?
Absolutely.
And if he's a terrible idea, then get him to articulate why.
Yeah. Well, he gave me actually an exercise. What are you building? And is this helping you fulfill your goals? Like, well, that's a great question. And I'm going to ask Paul tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, let's solve a problem. Is this help you get closer or are we just chasing more? So that's the first filter. Like, does this help you get closer to what you're trying to accomplish? And only you know the answer to that, right? We can sure solve the problem. But so, again, to just kind of continue on here and just let's talk about some of the growth principles. So if we're going to do this, well, we actually probably have a preponderance of data, actually, because you've done this before.
Yeah.
And you didn't like it.
I didn't love it.
Right?
No.
So So again, if we're gonna do this, the question is like in your in state, what are the rules? Like continuing to build out these commissioner frames. Like I'm not gonna do it unless we can hit these things. If it doesn't, if we can't hit all these things, we're just not gonna do it. We're gonna shut it down immediately.
Well, there were a couple different things when I hated it before as well, though, right? When I hated it before, I didn't have other people to subsidize my expenses, right? So I had to pay for marketing, right? I had to pay for marketing. Here, I don't have to pay for marketing. As a matter of fact, I get paid to do this because I have a title company now. Whereas before, I had to, go ask people for money to subsidize marketing. And even then, I was kind of like, it was always uncomfortable. Back then, I had no idea how to manage salespeople. Now I work with Ren. I know how to manage salespeople, right? But the reason why I hated it before was because salespeople had this tendency to always want to renegotiate their commissions and make more money in a zero-sum game where if you make more money, well, then I don't get to spend money on marketing, right? If you make more money, I don't get to profit, right? It's a different scenario now. Now we know how to effectively lead salespeople. So the things I hated before are no longer true. Or the two of the things I hated before are no longer true.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And so if we can design, so I think that the next step here is to take a micro step.
Yeah.
Because our tendency is going to be like, let's go hire this person and let's go build this whole thing out. But until we know that we can satisfy all these points on the commissioner frame, and we kind of also, we glossed over, we didn't really hit parenting frame. Like, how do we prevent this from happening? But that's relevant, I think, right now. How do we prevent ourselves from overbuilding too quickly and getting ourselves into a situation where if we do this thing, it's not that we're recapturing unused resources and reallocating it to this. That would actually be a really good thing. It's like now it starts taking up resources from the areas that are your number one thing. So what is the micro step here, Steve?
I think interview this candidate because we already interviewed her for another seat. It didn't work, for her. She wanted a base. So I think the micro step is to interview her, share this idea with her, and if she's on board, have her watch this episode. Right? It's like, hey, here's what you're walking into. I don't think we can document any better of here's what you're walking into than this candid dialogue we just had. So I think interview her, see if she's interested, have her watch this episode, and then I think she's heard all the negative things. And my free thoughts, there wasn't anything held back. And from there, I think that's probably the first micro step. After that, if she's on board with commission only, then I don't know. I mean, I want to say like let her rip, right? All right, like
what I would say, Steve, is you probably need to define the boundaries of what success looks like and how long you're willing to do it for. Yeah. So, for example, like you're being hired for, and again, this is why hyper honesty is actually much better in the long run. You're not sugarcoating it. You're saying like, we're trying this for 3 months. Here's the things that we're going to, here's what success looks like.
Yeah.
If we don't hit these things and it impacts, whatever, we're just going to call it a quits right there. We're just going to stop because we don't want to go forward. We don't want to scale until we've hit these predefined points. So if we can't hit those, then we're just not going to move forward. And the person that takes that position, they have to be aware of that. This is a performance-based thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So we know what her financial targets were. So I guess I would say, if this goes the way I see this going, she would make significantly more than her financial targets. So maybe we just have a situation where like, all right, here's what we need to hit target-wise. And if we do, we're hitting your goals. And as long as we're hitting your goals, since my goals would be higher, as long as we're hitting your goals, it makes sense to continue. After 3 months, you don't see how this supports your goals. We call it quits, right? Because if we're saying hypothetically, getting a percentage of the revenue from the commissions, and she's going to get percentage of the revenue actually twice, one from the downline component, one from the sales. If we're not doing, I don't know what's the math. I'll have to do the math. If it's 2 deals or 3 deals a month, if we're not generating 2 or 3 deals a month by month 3 from this exercise, it doesn't make sense to continue.
There you go. I mean, you just gotta I think this is the point where getting clarity as the commissioner of your own game, you're designing this. The only way that this works for you is if it has asymmetry to the upside. We have too many things in the middle of the bar. We've collected the information and we realize like we've got to keep the one thing the one thing.
Yeah.
It can't impact these other areas, but we do have an opportunity to like recapture some wasted resources and reallocate it to a revenue generating opportunity. But we just have to be cognizant of the other risks here. So I think with a well-designed micro step here, this next step is critical, right? Because if you're hiring somebody who ends up not understanding the rules of the game, and they don't understand that this could be over in 3 months if we don't hit certain things, well, we're just not going to, this is not a permanent thing. This is a test. And I think that's where I made that mistake a lot of times by just saying, we're going to do this thing, except I didn't define success. I didn't define an endpoint. We're going to do this until this, and then we're going to reevaluate.
Yeah.
And if we don't hit certain things, it's just not worth pursuing. And that's okay too. But that's, I think, where you are right now.
Yeah. I think that's a great micro step. So did we finish analyze, or are we still in the middle of analyze?
We're not to it yet. Like, I think
are we still on collect?
That's it. Is like the thing is you and I know that it's so heavily weighted on the collect side.
Yeah.
But that's not what everybody wants to hear. They want to hear go take action and go do it. Burn the boats, go all in. It's like, I'm not so sure about that. I'm not so sure that's always the best way to approach this, because our instincts, Dr. Jeff talked about this yesterday on our call, our instincts and our impulses, they're not, I would say more often than not, they can be right. But we've all had these instances where we've reacted in certain situations and it didn't end up getting us closer to what we want.
Right.
So that's what we're trying to safeguard from here. It's not like, we're not saying get into analysis paralysis. I think we always want to be biasing action, but micro-stepping and collecting the data. So I think we did collect the data. We looked at it, we analyzed it, and we said, okay, here's the step, the strategy. This is the micro step we're going to go take. Let's go execute on that. And then we'll bring it back through case. But you still have some work to define success in that role, define exactly what you're looking for, define your commissioner frame stuff. I would go seek out the professional skeptic frame from all of your team, get them to tell you why they think this is a bad idea, because you might find something that you hadn't considered.
Right.
And once we do all that, we'll get some information back, and it'll allow us to then run through this again, knowing what we know now. Should we continue, right? Which is the investor frame.
Yeah. Absolutely. Perfect. I think that's a good place to wrap up here. And then, when I do have this interview, and if it makes sense to move forward, we'll have an update, or we'll have a longer update. If it doesn't go the way we want it to go, we'll have a really short update.
Right. Well, and again, remember that this can't take resources from the main thing.
Right.
So it's like, we have to make sure that we're kind of fitting it in here. So yeah, I'm eager to hear. Go do these things, come back. Let's see if we can rehash this once we've done it.
Yeah.
And if you're listening to this, like, this is the process that we go through. I take people through on our certainty strategy sessions, which I'm doing. You can go to realestatecertainty.com. If you want to go through the same process I just did with Steve, you've got a big decision that you're looking to make, or a big challenge in your business. You're not sure what you should do. If you want to schedule some time, I can walk you through this process of asking these questions in an order that can help you think through this without just reacting based on our impulses and our instincts. Because as we know, they don't always serve us. Sometimes we get it right, but sometimes we end up making a mess and getting further away from what we want.
And not just going the wrong way, but going the wrong way fast.
Right.
And then it takes longer to get back. The amount of time it took for us to go off track is significantly smaller than the time it takes us to get back on track.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it's more important to be heading in the right direction than going fast.
Yeah. So cool. We'll wrap up here. I hope you guys got a ton of value. Hopefully this kind of adds some clarity as to what we talk about in Certainty Talks, trying to get what you want when you want it on your terms. This is really helpful for me and gave me some more clarity. And I think, Paul might question why he's a business partner with me right now. But beyond that, I hope you guys really enjoyed it, got a lot of value, and we'll see you guys next week. Bye, everyone.